The soft scuff of Arthur Jenkins's worn work boots against the polished marble floor echoed with a peculiar, almost mournful rhythm in the vast, emptying silence of the Harold Washington Library Center. Eleanor Vance felt it, a low thrumming beneath her skin, a prelude to the anxiety that always seized her when his shadow lengthened in their direction. Her fingers, usually steady as she tied the small laces of Lily's shoe, trembled almost imperceptibly. Her daughter, Lily, a sprite of 6 years with hair the color of spun moonlight and eyes that held the universe of 1,000 untold stories, remained blissfully unaware, lost in the intricate world of her own imagination. Eleanor straightened, her hand instinctively finding Lily's small shoulder, pulling her daughter a fraction closer. The instinct was primal, fierce, a shield rising against an unseen threat. Arthur stopped sweeping. The sudden cessation of the rhythmic shh was more jarring than any noise, leaving a hollow vacuum in the cavernous lobby, amplifying the thumping of Eleanor's own heart. He stood perhaps 10 feet away, a silhouette against the fading light, filtering through the grand archways. His shoulders, broad and stooped, seemed to bear the weight of decades, a testament to burdens unknown and perhaps unknowable. His gaze, even from this distance, felt heavy, unblinking, fixed on them. Eleanor had seen that look before too many times, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name, loneliness perhaps, or a longing that made her skin prickle with an uncomfortable awareness. She had learned, through bitter experience, to interpret such longing as a precursor to something darker, a demand disguised as a desire. He took a step, one hesitant, deliberate step. It shattered the delicate peace of the moment, sending a fresh wave of ice-cold dread through Eleanor. That single movement was enough. Her breath caught in her throat. The empty hall, usually a sanctuary of quiet erudition, felt vast and menacing. The air thrummed with a silent warning, a ghost of past hurts whispering directly into her ear. She remembered another man, charming and kind at first, whose gaze had promised warmth only to deliver an Arctic desolation. She remembered the slow, insidious erosion of her boundaries, the gradual tightening of a net that left her bruised, broken, and alone with a newborn daughter. That man had taught her the cost of vulnerability, the devastating price of misplacing trust. Now, her voice, though soft, was laced with an unmistakable firmness, a desperate plea and an unshakable command that reverberated in the sudden, echoing silence. "Please don't come closer," she said, the words hanging heavy and crystalline in the air between them, a fragile barrier against a world that had repeatedly proven itself unkind. Her eyes, usually the color of warm hazel, were now pools of guarded determination, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. She was not just speaking to Arthur Jenkins, the library's night janitor. She was speaking to the specters of her past, to the fear that gnawed at her, to the profound need to protect her daughter, Lily, and herself from any perceived threat, especially from a man who, to her weary perception, carried his own unsettling shadows, a man she found rough and unpredictable. Arthur flinched. It was a subtle movement, a tightening around his perpetually tired eyes, almost imperceptible stiffening of his frame. His face, already etched with an unreadable melancholy, closed off completely, becoming a mask of stone. Without a word, without a sound beyond the faint rustle of his overalls, he turned his back. The broom, a long-handled instrument of his solitary trade, resumed its scraping, a harsher, more isolated sound now, a rhythmic confession of his retreat. The vast lobby for Eleanor suddenly felt even emptier, colder. She felt a profound sense of relief, immediately followed by a wave of inexplicable, unsettling guilt. The moment passed, leaving a faint, acrid taste of sorrow in its wake, an unspoken exchange that underscored the chasm between them. Eleanor Vance, a woman in her early 30s, possessed a quiet strength that was often mistaken for timidity. This strength was not born of privilege or ease, but forged in the unforgiving fires of necessity. Her small apartment in the vibrant, working-class Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago was a testament to her tenacity. Its 2 rooms, though cramped, were meticulously clean, filled with Lily's colorful drawings and the scent of Eleanor's frugal, home-cooked meals. Every single dollar, every single cent she earned as a librarian's assistant at the Grand Harold Washington Library was a lifeline. It supported Lily, paid the mounting stack of bills, and kept the fragile ecosystem of their small lives from collapsing under the relentless pressure of economic precarity. The library itself was a world away from Pilsen, a majestic edifice of stone and glass, where knowledge was curated and preserved within towering shelves. Here, surrounded by millions of books, Eleanor felt a strange duality. She loved the quiet hum of intellect, the rich scent of old paper and leather, the endless possibilities contained within bound pages. Yet, she was always keenly aware of her place, a small cog in a vast machine, her role modest, her presence often overlooked. This anonymity, in a strange way, was a comfort. It allowed her to blend in, to observe, to navigate her days with the quiet dignity she so carefully cultivated. Each evening, as the library began its graceful transition from bustling public space to hushed sanctuary, Eleanor's routine was immutable. She would leave her desk, located in a quiet corner of the fiction section, and walk purposefully to the children's wing. There, amidst colourful murals and miniature chairs, Lily would be immersed in her own world, a worn notebook clutched in her small hands, sketching fantastical creatures with an intense focus that belied her tender age. Lily was Eleanor's anchor, her reason for every struggle, every sacrifice. Her smile, bright and unburdened, was the sun around which Eleanor's entire universe revolved. It was during these quiet transitions, as the last patrons trickled out into the crisp Chicago air, that Eleanor's path inevitably crossed with Arthur Jenkins. Their encounters were brief, almost ritualistic, a series of unspoken observations and averted glances. Arthur, at 47 years of age, was a figure of quiet contrast to the intellectual vibrancy that filled the library during the day. His shoulders, already mentioned, carried not just the weight of decades, but a palpable aura of weariness. His eyes, though often downcast or fixed on some distant point, held an unreadable melancholy that Eleanor, despite her wariness, could not ignore. His reputation preceded him. He was known for being gruff, his words clipped, often monosyllabic when he spoke at all. The few times Eleanor had tried to engage him in polite conversation, a comment about the weather, a brief query about a misplaced item, she had been met with a curt nod or a mumbled response that bordered on dismissive. This reinforced her initial impression. He was rough, unapproachable, perhaps even unkind. She'd tried to maintain a polite distance, a barrier of professional deference that shielded her from his unnerving presence. It was a strategy she had honed over years, a necessary defense mechanism. Yet, there was something about the way he watched her with Lily, that flicker of something in his eyes, a brief softening of his stern features that perplexed her. It wasn't the predatory gleam she so feared, but something else entirely. She dismissed it as loneliness, a simple human longing she knew many carried, but the way his gaze lingered a beat too long, the way he would sometimes pause, his sweeping broom held still, as if caught in a silent reverie, made her uneasy. It stirred a dormant fear, a primal alarm bell in her heart. She couldn't afford to misinterpret signals, not anymore. Her past had taught her that. Her ex-husband, a man named David, had entered her life like a warm spring breeze, charming and attentive. He had seen her quiet nature not as timidity, but as grace, and had showered her with affection and promises of a bright future. For a time, Eleanor had allowed herself to believe in that future, to lower her guard, to open her heart. But the warmth had slowly, imperceptibly turned to ice. His attentiveness became possessiveness, his charm a manipulative facade. He had systematically chipped away at her self-worth, isolated her from friends and family, and eventually, after Lily's birth, had left her with a mountain of debt, a broken spirit, and the crushing weight of single parenthood. The scars of that betrayal ran deep, shaping her perception of every man she encountered, casting a long, dark shadow over any potential for connection. Arthur Jenkins, with his gruff exterior and unreadable eyes, became, in Eleanor's guarded mind, a symbol of potential danger. His silent observation felt like scrutiny, his lingering gaze an invasion. She saw in him the echoes of a past she desperately wanted to keep buried. Her vigilance was absolute. Lily was her everything, and Eleanor would go to any lengths to protect her from the kind of pain she herself had endured. Her "please don't come closer" was not just a rejection of Arthur. It was a desperate affirmation of her self-preservation, a boundary drawn in the sand, etched in fear, meant to protect the fragile haven she had painstakingly built for herself and her daughter. As Arthur resumed his sweeping, the rhythmic strokes of the broom against the marble floor filled the silence once more, a stark, melancholic counterpoint to the hurried beat of Eleanor's heart. She squeezed Lily's hand, a silent promise to herself and to her daughter that they would remain safe, unburdened by the desires or the shadows of others. The library, a monument to a million stories, held within its walls one more unspoken narrative, a tale of fear, of loneliness, and of two souls, unknowingly broken by life's cruelest blows, caught in a dance of misunderstanding, each retreating into their own carefully constructed fortresses. The evening light outside had faded into true darkness, and the vast spaces of the library became even more imposing, filled with untold secrets and the lingering scent of old paper and unfulfilled longing. Eleanor, pulling her daughter close, walked towards the exit, her back straight, her resolve unwavering, her mind already planning the next day's defenses, unaware that the universe had subtly, irrevocably, begun to weave a different thread into the tapestry of their lives. The cold seeped into Eleanor's bones in the days following her stark pronouncement to Arthur Jenkins. Not just the physical chill of late autumn in Chicago, but an internal coldness, a knot of unease that settled deep in her chest. She had acted purely on instinct, a visceral need to shield Lily, and a familiar fear had clawed its way up her throat, hardening her resolve. Yet the memory of Arthur's flinch, the almost imperceptible sag of his shoulders, the way his face had closed off, haunted her. It was a fleeting image, easily dismissed as the reaction of a rough man rebuffed, but it clung to her, a faint, disquieting whisper in the back of her mind. She told herself it was simply the residual adrenaline, the aftertaste of a necessary confrontation. She had done what she needed to do. End of story. But life for Eleanor was never so simple. Each morning began before dawn, the silence of their Pilsen apartment broken only by the soft rhythm of her breathing and the distant rumble of the L train. She would prepare Lily's small lunch, pack her worn backpack, and then, with a kiss to Lily's sleeping forehead, she'd embark on her own daily pilgrimage. The bus ride to the Harold Washington Library was a time of quiet reflection, a precious few minutes stolen from the relentless demands of her schedule. She'd watch the city awaken, its towering buildings slowly catching the first reluctant rays of sunlight, and feel the familiar weight of responsibility settle upon her. Her job as a librarian's assistant was more than just a paycheck. It was the bedrock upon which their fragile security rested. Every shift, every processed book, every answered query was a brick in the wall she built around Lily, a defense against the unpredictable winds of fate. Arthur, for his part, retreated even deeper into his shell. Eleanor's words, sharp and clear in the echoing hall, had struck a raw nerve, reverberating with the echoes of every judgment, every accusation, every rejection he had ever faced. He had seen the fear in her eyes, a primal animal fear, and it had twisted the nascent hope within him into something ugly and painful. He had yearned for connection, a simple human acknowledgement, but instead he had received a forceful repulse. It was a mirror of his own life story. His intentions, no matter how pure, invariably misunderstood, his character misjudged. He wore his gruffness like a cloak, a deliberate barrier to keep the world and its inevitable disappointments at bay. Few knew that beneath the stained overalls and the perpetually tired eyes, beneath the silence and the stoic facade, beat the heart of a man who once navigated the intricate worlds of classical literature, a man whose hands, now calloused from scrubbing floors, had once turned the pages of ancient texts with reverence, guiding young minds through the labyrinthine pathways of thought. He had taught at a small university in rural Ohio, a world away from the bustling metropolis of Chicago, a world he had painstakingly built, brick by intellectual brick, only to have it crumble to dust in the wake of a scandalous, unfounded accusation. The library became his refuge, not for its books, which now felt like ghosts of a life he had lost, but for its anonymity. The steady paycheck allowed him to exist, to remain invisible, to bury his past beneath layers of silence. He had observed Eleanor Vance from a distance, drawn to her quiet dignity, the way she spoke to Lily with such tenderness, the resilience etched into her tired smile. He saw in her a strength that resonated with his own hidden battles, a longing for connection that his social awkwardness and past trauma made impossible to express without terrifying the very person he admired. His longing for her, as Eleanor had feared, was not predatory. but born of a profound aching loneliness, a desperate yearning for the simple warmth of human companionship, for the kind of family he had once known and tragically lost. He recognized the same guardedness in her, a mirrored fear, a protective shell built around a vulnerable core. One particularly blustery autumn evening, as the sky outside turned a bruised purple and the wind howled through the city's canyons of steel and glass, Eleanor was engrossed in a delicate task. She was restoring a rare first edition of The Velveteen Rabbit, a children's classic she cherished, not just for its enduring story but for its sentimental value. It had been her mother's favorite, a fragile link to a happier, simpler past. Every page, every delicate illustration, held a piece of her childhood, a whisper of comfort in a world often devoid of it. She meticulously mended a torn page with archival tape, her brow furrowed in concentration. The library was nearly empty, the last few stragglers urged out by the closing announcement echoing through the PA system. Lily, as usual, was in the children's section, drawing. The weight of the day, a particularly challenging one, filled with demanding patrons and an unexpected backlog of cataloguing, pressed down on Eleanor. Her mind, usually so meticulously organized, was a whirlwind of anxieties. The overdue electric bill, Lily's upcoming school field trip, the nagging worry that she wasn't doing enough. Exhaustion clouded her judgment, blurring the edges of her usual vigilance. When the time came to gather Lily, Eleanor tucked her restoration tools into her bag, pulled her jacket tighter, and rushed to the children's section, her mind already on the commute home. The book, still open on her desk, was forgotten, a sentinel left behind in the quiet, emptying library. Hours later, long after the last librarian had locked the main doors and the night staff had settled into their quiet routines, Arthur began his meticulous sweep of the fiction section. The rhythmic swish of his broom was the only sound, a steady counterpoint to the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. He moved with practiced efficiency, his gaze sweeping over the rows of books, the empty chairs, the deserted desks. It was then that he saw it, a small hardback book, its cover a faded hue of rose and cream, sitting open on Eleanor Vance's desk. He approached cautiously, his instincts as a former academic overriding his janitorial duties for a moment. He recognized the title immediately, a classic. His fingers, surprisingly gentle despite their roughness, traced the delicate spine. He knew it was Eleanor's. He had seen her poring over it, carefully mending its pages, her face alight with a tenderness he rarely witnessed from her. He picked it up, the faint scent of old paper and something else, perhaps a hint of Eleanor's subtle floral perfume, wafting up to him. He considered leaving it on her desk, where she would undoubtedly find it in the morning. That was the logical, impersonal choice. But as he held the book, a rare first edition, he noticed a minor imperfection in the binding, a tiny, almost invisible tear near the spine. It was the kind of detail only a true bibliophile, a meticulous craftsman of words and paper, would spot. And in that moment, something shifted within him. He saw not just a forgotten object, but a small vulnerable piece of Eleanor, entrusted, however inadvertently, to his care. A quiet defiance against his usual stoicism rose within him. He would not leave it. He would return it himself. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at her desk with the usual flurry of coats and bags, her mind already racing through the day's tasks. She paused, a flicker of panic seizing her. The book. The Velveteen Rabbit. It wasn't there. Her stomach clenched. She frantically searched her bag, then her drawers, her heart beginning to hammer with a sickening rhythm. It was a rare edition, irreplaceable, more valuable to her than any monetary sum. Had she left it out? Had someone taken it? The thought sent a jolt of icy dread through her. Just as she was about to report it, a shadow fell across her desk. Eleanor looked up, her breath catching in her throat. Arthur Jenkins stood there, his usual work uniform crisp, his posture stiff, holding a book in his hand. Her book. For a fleeting second, a wave of relief washed over her so profound it made her light-headed. Then, the familiar wall of wariness slammed back into place. Why was he holding it? What did he want? Arthur extended the book, holding it out to her, his movements stiff and almost awkward. "Janitor left this," he said, his voice surprisingly softer than she had ever heard it, stripped of its usual gruffness, almost hesitant. It was a low rumble, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of untold stories, a stark contrast to the clipped, impersonal tones she was accustomed to. "The binding," he added, his gaze flicking to the book, then back to her, a brief, almost imperceptible hesitation in his eyes. "It has a small tear, near the spine. Not structural, but present." Eleanor stared at him, then at the book. He was right. The tear was minuscule, barely visible to the untrained eye. She had been so engrossed in mending the internal pages that she hadn't noticed that particular flaw. A wave of surprise, followed by a reluctant respect, washed over her. It was an observation that spoke of deep knowledge, of a genuine appreciation for the object itself, an expertise she wouldn't have attributed to the library's night janitor. He wasn't just a cleaner. He saw the books. This simple act, this quiet, observant detail began to chip away, ever so slightly, at the carefully constructed facade of her perception of him. "Oh," she managed, her voice a little breathy, still recovering from the scare. "Thank you, I hadn't noticed that." She reached out, her fingers brushing his as she took the book. His skin was rough, calloused, but there was a surprising warmth in the brief contact. She quickly withdrew her hand, the instinct to retreat still overriding any burgeoning connection. "Thank you, Arthur. Truly, I appreciate it." She offered a tentative, almost imperceptible smile, a small crack in her carefully built defenses. Arthur simply nodded, his face once again a mask of quiet solitude. He turned his broad back to her and walked away, the soft scuff of his boots resuming its familiar rhythm. Eleanor watched him go, a strange mix of emotions swirling within her. Relief, gratitude, yes, but also a deepening confusion. This was not the rough, unpredictable man she had painted him to be. This was a man who handled delicate objects with care, who noticed details, whose voice, for a moment, had held a quiet tenderness. The memory of David, her ex-husband, immediately surged to the forefront of her mind, a phantom pain in her heart. He had been charming too charming. His kindness had been a bait, his attentiveness a trap. He had studied her vulnerabilities, exploited her trusting nature, and left her shattered. Eleanor had sworn then, as Lily lay tiny and helpless in her arms, that she would never again allow herself to be deceived. She would build walls so high, so thick, that no one, no matter how seemingly kind or unassuming, could ever break through. Her "please don't come closer" had been a reflex born of that devastating experience, a shield against any perceived threat, especially from someone who, like Arthur, seemed to carry his own shadows. She couldn't afford to entertain any ambiguity, any softening of her defenses. The cost was simply too high. Yet Arthur's quiet act of returning the book, his gentle observation about the binding, continued to gnaw at her. It was a discordant note in the symphony of her ingrained fear. She found herself observing him now with a different lens. As he moved through the library, polishing the banisters, emptying the waste bins, she noticed the meticulousness of his work, the almost reverent way he handled the antique furniture. She heard occasionally the faint, almost imperceptible hum of classical music as he worked late, a melody that seemed strangely out of place, yet undeniably elegant. These small details, previously overlooked, began to accumulate, forming tiny cracks in the rigid perception she held of him. Arthur, though he maintained his distance, felt the subtle shift in Eleanor. She still avoided his gaze, still pulled Lily a little closer when their paths inevitably crossed, but there was a new, almost imperceptible softening in her posture, a hesitant curiosity in her peripheral glances. He understood her fear. It mirrored his own. Her guardedness, he now realized, was not a personal affront, but a testament to her own past hurts, a deep-seated trauma that made her wary of any perceived vulnerability. He saw her as a fellow survivor, a kindred spirit encased in her own protective armor. His yearning for connection, initially born of pure loneliness, now carried a profound empathy, a quiet understanding of her struggle. He watched her, no longer with a sense of rejection, but with a patient hope, a silent acknowledgement of the barriers that stood between them. He knew, deep down, that those barriers were not insurmountable, but they would require a profound act of courage, a willingness to dismantle the very walls they had both spent years constructing. The book, seemingly a minor incident, had laid a single, fragile thread across the chasm. The question was, would either of them dare to pull it? to test its strength against the formidable winds of their pasts. He would wait, for as long as it took, cleaning the silent halls, observing the woman who unknowingly held a key to a part of his heart he thought had been lost forever. The harsh winter winds of Chicago were just beginning to gather strength outside, foreshadowing a storm that would soon challenge everything they thought they knew about each other. The biting wind of a burgeoning Chicago winter howled around the Harold Washington Library Center, carrying with it the first tentative flakes of snow. It was early December, and the city, usually bustling with festive energy, felt hushed, expectant, as if holding its breath for the inevitable blizzard. Eleanor's unease, a constant low hum beneath the surface of her daily life, was amplified by the shift in weather. Her worn winter coat, a veteran of many seasons, felt inadequate against the escalating cold. She worried constantly about Lily, about the rising cost of heating their small apartment in Pilsen, about every precarious thread holding their lives together. The small act of kindness from Arthur, returning her cherished book, had softened her perception of him, but only marginally. The deep-seated wariness, the fear instilled by David, remained a formidable fortress around her heart. She couldn't afford to let down her guard, not for a moment. Arthur, on the other hand, found himself observing Eleanor with a heightened sense of quiet urgency. The winter's approach always brought with it a particular melancholy for him, a stark reminder of past losses. He saw the subtle signs of her struggle, the way she would sometimes shiver despite her coat, the faint dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could truly hide. He noticed the worn soles of Lily's small boots, the careful rationing of snacks in Lily's lunchbox. He saw her quiet strength, yes, but he also saw the relentless toll it took on her. The incident with the book had cracked a small opening in his own guarded exterior, allowing a sliver of genuine connection to pass through. He felt an inexplicable pull towards her, a recognition of shared burdens, a profound empathy that transcended his usual solitary existence. He longed to offer comfort, to bridge the chasm between them, but the memory of her stark "please don't come closer" was a constant echo, a chilling reminder of the invisible wall she had erected. The whispers of an impending blizzard grew louder, carried by weather reports and the anxious chatter of patrons. Forecasts spoke of record snowfall, paralyzing winds, and a city brought to a standstill. Eleanor dismissed most of it as sensationalism. Chicagoans were resilient. They weathered blizzards every year. Yet a tiny seed of apprehension took root. Lily was at her after-school program, a small daycare across town, a 30-minute bus ride even on a clear day. Eleanor's shift was scheduled to end just as the worst of the storm was predicted to hit. She called the daycare twice, confirming Lily was safe, making arrangements for her to stay a little longer if needed. The director, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, assured her everything would be fine. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the first heavy snow began to fall. Not the gentle flakes of early winter, but thick, wet clumps, carried on a vicious wind that whipped through the city streets. Visibility rapidly deteriorated. The library, usually a beacon of warmth and light, began to take on an eerie quality, its grand windows obscured by the swirling white. A terse announcement came over the PA system. Attention, patrons. Due to rapidly worsening weather conditions, the Harold Washington Library Center will be closing early today. At 4 o'clock p.m., all patrons are advised to seek shelter immediately. Repeat, the library will close at 4 o'clock p.m. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Eleanor. 4 o'clock. Lily wasn't due to be picked up until 5. The daycare. She frantically dialed Mrs. Rodriguez. No answer. She tried again, and again. Nothing but a static-filled voicemail. The bus routes would be chaos already. She rushed to the main entrance, peering out into the swirling maelstrom. The streets were already covered in a thick blanket of white, cars crawling at a snail's pace, headlights barely piercing the gloom. A taxi, an impossible dream. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Lily, alone, terrified. "Lily!" she gasped, the word a desperate plea, swallowed by the roar of the wind outside. She had to get to her. She began to pull on her coat, fumbling with the buttons, her hands shaking. Just as she was about to brave the storm, a small, familiar hand slipped into hers. Eleanor looked down, her eyes widening in disbelief, then relief so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Lily. Mrs. Rodriguez stood beside her, bundled in a thick coat, her face flushed from the cold. "Mrs. Vance, thank goodness I caught you," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice strained over the wind. "The buses stopped running an hour ago. And our daycare, the pipes burst. We had to evacuate everyone. I couldn't reach you. I knew you were still working, so I walked Lily here myself as fast as I could. The phones are out at the daycare. I had to make sure she was safe." Eleanor knelt, pulling Lily into a fierce hug, burying her face in the child's soft hair. "Oh, Lily, my angel, are you all right?" Lily nodded, shivering. "It's really cold, Mama. And scary." Mrs. Rodriguez, her face etched with concern, added, "I have to go. My own children are home alone. I wish I could stay, but please be safe, Eleanor. It's going to be a bad one." With a quick nod, she turned and disappeared back into the swirling white, a phantom swallowed by the blizzard. Eleanor stood, clutching Lily's hand, feeling utterly stranded. The library's massive doors groaned shut, sealing them inside. The grand lobby, usually so reassuring, now felt like a gilded cage. The staff hurrying to leave barely noticed them. She looked out at the raging storm, then back into the emptying library. No way out, nowhere to go. Panic, raw and unyielding, clawed at her throat. "What are we going to do, Lily?" she whispered, her voice cracking. A shadow fell across them. Arthur Jenkins. He had been clearing the last of the waste bins near the main entrance, a silent, almost invisible presence. He had witnessed the entire exchange, seen the raw fear in Eleanor's eyes, the small shivering figure of Lily clinging to her mother. He moved towards them, his usual gruffness replaced by a quiet, watchful stillness. Eleanor instinctively pulled Lily tighter, her body tensing, her "please don't come closer" flashing through her mind. A phantom warning, but he stopped a respectful distance away, his gaze direct, unblinking, yet devoid of the unsettling intensity she had previously perceived. "I can't go out there," Arthur said, his voice low, surprisingly calm. "It's a whiteout, and the buses are down. The L might be next." He gestured vaguely towards the staff lounge, a rarely used space deep within the library's administrative wing. "There's a generator for the essentials. Heat, some lights, it's warm in there, safer than out here." Eleanor hesitated, her instincts warring. Her ingrained distrust flared, but the sheer practicality of his words, the desperate reality of their situation, cut through her fear. He wasn't approaching her, not in the way she feared. He was offering a solution, a shelter. She looked at Lily, whose small teeth were chattering despite her mother's embrace. "Okay," Eleanor finally said, the word barely a whisper. "Thank you, Arthur." He nodded, a brief, almost imperceptible dip of his head. "Follow me." He led them through dimly lit corridors, past rows of shrouded bookshelves, the silence broken only by the mournful groaning of the wind outside. The staff lounge was small, tucked away, a forgotten corner of the grand building. It was indeed warm, heated by the backup generator, a stark contrast to the rapidly chilling public areas. A single bare bulb cast a stark yellowish light over a worn sofa, a couple of mismatched chairs, and a small, dusty kitchenette. Arthur found a spare institutional green blanket from a cabinet and handed it to Eleanor. "For Lily," he said, his voice still low, devoid of any discernible emotion. Then, with surprising tenderness, he brewed herbal tea from a forgotten stash, its aroma a welcome comfort in the sterile room. Eleanor sat on the sofa, pulling Lily onto her lap, wrapping the blanket tightly around them both. She tried her phone again. No signal. The outside world had vanished, leaving them in a strange, isolated bubble. Lily, after sipping the warm tea, began to look around, her initial fear slowly giving way to curiosity. Her gaze landed on an old, dusty globe in the corner, its faded continents a testament to countless forgotten journeys. Arthur, who had been quietly wiping down a counter in the kitchenette, noticed Lily's fascination. He hesitated, then approached the child. This was the most frightening thing he had ever done. For years he had walled himself off, allowed his gruff exterior to become his entire identity, but the sight of this frightened child, this resilient mother, stirred something deep within him, something he thought had been lost forever. He remembered a time when he could captivate an audience, when his voice, rich and melodic, could weave tales that transported listeners to distant lands. He looked at Lily, then at Eleanor, then back at the dusty globe. "Do you know," he began, his voice surprisingly soft, a stark contrast to the gruffness Eleanor was accustomed to, "that people once believed the world was flat? They thought if you sailed too far, you'd simply fall off the edge. He traced an imaginary journey with his finger across the globe's faded oceans. But then, brave explorers, like Magellan, they dared to believe otherwise. They sailed for months, battling storms, facing the unknown, until they finally proved the world was a sphere. Lily's eyes, wide with wonder, were fixed on him. Eleanor watched, stunned, a strange tightness in her chest. This was not the mean janitor. This was a man of profound learning, a storyteller. His voice, once clipped and terse, now flowed with an almost lyrical quality, recounting tales of ancient cultures, forgotten myths, and daring adventurers. He spoke of the Silk Road, of the lost city of Petra, of the constellations that guided ancient mariners. He traced his fingers across Africa, Asia, Europe, his words painting vivid pictures in the dim light of the staff lounge. It was as if a hidden door had suddenly opened, revealing a vast, unexpected landscape within him. Eleanor found herself captivated, listening intently, her long-held perception of him slowly, irrevocably, shattering. Later, as the storm raged outside, rattling the windows with relentless fury, Lily, curled up next to Eleanor, pointed to a faded framed photograph on a shelf above the dusty globe. It was a picture of a vibrant young man with kind eyes, holding a small boy, both smiling, their faces full of an easy, unburdened joy. The young man in the photo, with his intense gaze and slight knowing smile, was strikingly familiar. "He looks like you," Lily whispered to Arthur, her voice barely audible over the wind. Arthur, who had just returned from checking the emergency exit, stiffened. He froze, his back to them, his shoulders tensing, as if struck by an invisible blow. Eleanor glanced at the picture, then back at Arthur, seeing the undeniable resemblance, the ghost of an easier, happier past in the youthful face staring out from the faded frame. The eyes were the same, but full of light, not the melancholy she now saw. The strong jawline, the slight dimple in the chin, all undeniably Arthur, but a younger, brighter version of him. Arthur slowly turned, his face pale, his eyes distant, filled with a profound sadness. He looked at the photograph, then at Lily, then at Eleanor. The protective shell he had built around himself, so meticulously constructed over years of solitude, suddenly seemed to crack. The truth, raw and devastating, was ready to spill out, forced into the light by the innocent observation of a child and the isolating intimacy of the raging storm. He finally spoke, his voice raw, hoarse with emotion, thick with unshed tears. That was me," he began, his gaze fixed on the photo as if seeing a ghost. "And that's Daniel, my son." His voice broke. He swallowed hard, then continued, each word a painful confession. He was lost to an illness. Just after the accusations. The unjust accusations that cost me everything. My career, my reputation, my will to live. He paused, taking a ragged breath. My wife, she couldn't cope. With the double tragedy, the loss of our boy, and the shame. She left me, said she couldn't look at me without seeing the wreckage. Eleanor listened, her heart aching. The gruffness, the solitude. It wasn't a chosen state, but a fortress, a desperate defense built around a broken heart, a shield against more loss, more pain. He wasn't just a janitor, he was a survivor, a man stripped bare by tragedy and injustice. His words painted a vivid, agonizing picture of a life utterly destroyed, of a love lost, of a future brutally stolen. He looked at Eleanor then, his eyes, usually so unreadable, now vulnerable, filled with a raw, desperate yearning. "When I saw you," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper, "with Lily, a mother struggling so fiercely protective, I saw the family I lost, the warmth, the connection. I wanted it back, not to possess you, or to make you mine, but to share in the quiet strength I saw in you, to find solace in a kindred spirit. My desire for your love," he clarified, the words thick with an unspoken pain. "It wasn't a crude advance, Eleanor. It was a desperate yearning for the family, the connection, the simple warmth I had lost. I didn't know how to say it, how to even feel it anymore." The truth, revealed in the soft, yellowed glow of the staff lounge amidst the howling storm, was a seismic shift. Eleanor felt the carefully constructed walls around her heart crumble. He wasn't a threat, he was a mirror, a fellow survivor of life's cruelest blows. His rough exterior, his unsettling silence, his lingering gaze, all of it was a language of pain, a cry for understanding from a man who had lost everything. The words, "Please don't come closer," echoed in her mind, no longer a proud declaration of self-preservation, but a devastating confession of her own misjudgment, her own fear. They had been born of her past trauma, a reflex, a shield that had tragically pushed away a deeply wounded soul. The storm outside raged, but the storm within Eleanor had only just begun to truly break. The blizzard intensified, a relentless whiteout that consumed the city, trapping them inside the library's staff lounge. Yet, the storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest now raging within Eleanor. Arthur's raw confession, his shattered composure, had ripped apart her carefully constructed perception of him, exposing a profound vulnerability she never could have imagined. His story, told with such agony in the flickering lamplight, resonated with the deep, unspoken hurts of her own past. The mean janitor, the rough, unpredictable man, had vanished, replaced by a ghost of his former self. A scholar, a father, a man unjustly broken, whose desperate yearning for connection mirrored her own unacknowledged solitude. The words, "Please don't come closer," now echoed in her mind, not as a badge of honor, but as a deeply regrettable indictment of her own fear and prejudice. She had judged him, condemned him, based on her own pain, on the deceit of a past love, mistaking his profound loneliness for something sinister. The guilt was a heavy, suffocating weight. She had been so consumed by her own defenses, so terrified of repeating past mistakes, that she had failed to see beyond the surface, failed to recognize a kindred spirit in distress. She saw his pain, his loss, and understood, with devastating clarity, that his desire had indeed been for a shared warmth, a quiet solace, not the predatory grip of control she had so feared. Lily, oblivious to the emotional maelstrom swirling between the two adults, had fallen asleep, her small body curled against Eleanor's side on the worn sofa, the herbal tea long since finished. Eleanor held her daughter tighter, the warmth of Lily's presence a stark contrast to the cold regret settling in her heart. She looked at Arthur, who had retreated to a chair in the corner, his gaze fixed on the fading photograph of his son, Daniel. The image, once a silent enigma, now screamed with the vibrant life of a shattered past, a love brutally lost. Eleanor began to see Arthur everywhere, not just in the present, but in the echoes of his past. She imagined him as the young man in the photograph, vibrant and full of hope, teaching literature, his voice rich with the cadence of poetry, his hands gesturing passionately as he dissected ancient texts. She saw him as a loving father, playfully holding his son, his eyes crinkling with joy, and then the painful overlay of his current reality, the stooped shoulders, the quiet resignation, the deep-set melancholy in his eyes, the meticulous way he polished the banisters, now seemed like a form of silent meditation, a way to channel his grief into a tangible act of care. The classical music he sometimes hummed as he worked late was not random, but a relic of his former life, a private sanctuary of beauty he carried within. His gentle, almost shy glances, once interpreted as unnerving, now seemed like silent pleas, quiet acknowledgments of a shared human condition. The storm outside raged for another 12 hours, finally breaking just before dawn. As the first pale light of morning filtered through the library's grand windows, casting long, ethereal shadows, a sense of weary calm settled over the staff lounge. The electricity, which had flickered intermittently throughout the night, returned with a triumphant hum. The phone sprang back to life. Eleanor's first call was to her landlord, arranging for her apartment's heat to be checked. Her second was to Lily's school, confirming their safety. As the city slowly began to dig itself out, the library staff started to arrive, surprised to find Eleanor and Lily already there. Mrs. Davidson, the head librarian, a kind but no-nonsense woman, rushed in, her face etched with concern. "Eleanor? Lily? Are you all right? We were so worried." Eleanor offered a tired smile. "We're fine, Mrs. Davidson. Arthur took care of us. He made sure we were warm and safe." Her gaze met Arthur's across the room, a silent acknowledgement, a fragile bridge built between them in the crucible of the storm. Arthur, true to his nature, simply nodded, his face impassive, already resuming his duties, as if the profound intimacy of the night before had never happened. But Eleanor knew. She saw the subtle shift in his eyes, the almost imperceptible softening around their edges when he looked at Lily. The wall hadn't vanished entirely, but a significant crack had appeared. The path forward was not easy. The storm had broken, but the emotional storm within Eleanor continued to rage. The weight of her judgment, her dismissive, "Please don't come closer," pressed down on her with renewed force. She felt a deep pang of regret, a profound shame for her own fear-driven blindness. She had been so intent on protecting herself that she had shut out a genuinely wounded soul. Her past, the betrayal that had made her so guarded, now felt like a cage she had built around herself, trapping out not just pain, but also the possibility of genuine connection, of empathy, of a second chance for two broken people. The next few days were awkward, a delicate dance around the unspoken. Eleanor found herself seeking Arthur out, not with romantic intent, but with a genuine, hesitant curiosity. She lingered by his cleaning cart, found excuses to pass through the sections he was working in. She started by asking him about the books, testing the waters. "Arthur," she began one afternoon, approaching him as he polished a display case in the rare books section, his hands moving with the same quiet reverence she had noticed with her own book. "You mentioned the binding on The Velveteen Rabbit. Do you know a lot about books?" He paused his polishing, surprised by her directness. He looked at her, then back at the glass as if weighing his words. I used to teach literature before." The word "before" hung in the air, thick with unspoken tragedy. Eleanor swallowed, her heart aching for him. "You were a professor?" He nodded, a brief, almost imperceptible movement. "At a small university in Ohio." "That's incredible, Arthur." Why here?" she asked gently, knowing she was treading on sacred, painful ground, but compelled by a desperate need to understand, to bridge the gap. He looked at her then, his eyes meeting hers, and for the first time she saw a flicker of his old self, the scholar, the man who once held court in lecture halls. "Anonymity," he said, the word a heavy sigh. "Peace, a place to disappear." He didn't elaborate, but he didn't need to. Eleanor understood. He was hiding not just from the world, but from the unbearable pain of his past. Slowly, carefully, over the course of weeks, a fragile bridge began to form. Eleanor, humbled by his story, cautiously allowed herself to lower her guard, one small brick at a time. She asked him about Daniel, her voice soft, respectful. Arthur, surprised by her newfound openness, cautiously allowed himself to trust. He shared stories of his son, of his former life as an academic, of the injustice that had stripped him bare. He spoke of Daniel's infectious laugh, his insatiable curiosity, the way he would light up a room. His voice, once raw with emotion, now held a tender, melancholic warmth whenever he spoke of his lost boy. Eleanor, in turn, found herself confessing the pain of her own past, the betrayal that had made her so guarded, the fear of vulnerability that had caused her to misinterpret his initial outreach. She spoke of David, not with bitterness, but with a quiet, weary resignation, explaining how his manipulation had left her emotionally scarred and financially destitute. "I built walls, Arthur," she admitted one quiet afternoon, as they sat in the staff lounge, now a place of unexpected intimacy. "So high, so thick, to protect Lily, to protect myself. I saw your loneliness, your longing, and I projected my own fears onto it. I saw a threat where there was just pain." Arthur listened intently, his gaze unwavering, a profound understanding in his eyes. "I understand, Eleanor," he said, his voice gentle. "I built my own walls, to keep the judgment out, to keep the pain of Daniel, of my past, locked away. I didn't know how to reach out. I still barely do." Their connection, forged in the crucible of a blizzard and nurtured in shared confidences, was not a sudden explosion of romance. It was a slow, careful building of trust, a delicate unfolding of two deeply wounded souls, finding solace in each other's understanding. It was a recognition that beneath the protective armor, both carried similar scars, similar longings for connection, for a future unburdened by the shadows of the past. One spring evening, several months after the blizzard, long after the library had closed, they found themselves standing by the towering shelves of rare books, the silence now comfortable, understanding. The city lights twinkled outside the grand windows, a million tiny stars against the inky blackness. Arthur, no longer gruff, no longer just the janitor, turned to Eleanor. His eyes, though still holding a trace of melancholy, now held a new light, a gentle warmth she hadn't seen before. "Eleanor," he began, his voice soft, almost a whisper, I found this." He held out a small, delicately carved wooden rabbit, its ears long and graceful, its eyes tiny glass beads that seemed to sparkle with life. It was a miniature, perfect replica of the Velveteen Rabbit, Eleanor's cherished book. I'm a self-taught craftsman. It's a hobby." Eleanor took the carving, her fingers tracing the smooth wood, her heart swelling with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It was a tangible symbol of his unspoken care, his meticulous attention, his quiet understanding of her. It was a bridge built not of words, but of profound empathy. She remembered the original book, the small imperfection in the binding he had spotted, the quiet knowledge he possessed. "Arthur," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "It's beautiful. Thank you." She looked at him, truly looked at him, seeing past the overalls, past the years of solitude, to the kind, intelligent, deeply wounded man beneath. The words, "Please don't come closer," felt like a distant, painful memory, a ghost of her former self. He extended his hand then, not in a demanding gesture, not in the way that had once triggered her fear, but in an offering of quiet companionship, a tentative invitation to step beyond the shadows of their pasts. His hand, calloused from years of labor, yet capable of such delicate artistry, was open, waiting. Eleanor met his gaze, no longer afraid. The fear of vulnerability, the legacy of David's betrayal, had finally begun to recede, replaced by a fragile, burgeoning hope. She recalled her painful words from months ago, the desperate cry of a woman trapped by her past. She understood now that his initial outreach had been a raw cry for connection from a lonely man, met by her own fear-driven rejection. She took his hand, the warmth of his calloused fingers a stark contrast to the coldness of her past fears. His grip was gentle, steady, reassuring. In that moment, surrounded by the silent majesty of the library, she realized that sometimes "don't come closer" is merely a desperate cry for understanding, a protective barrier that, when slowly, carefully dismantled, can open the door to a connection more profound and more healing than anything one could ever imagine. The small carved wooden rabbit lay nestled in Eleanor's palm, its polished surface reflecting the dim, quiet lights of the library's rare book section. Its weight was negligible, yet it felt impossibly heavy with unspoken meaning. Arthur's hand, now gently clasped in hers, was a testament to a connection slowly, painstakingly forged. The raw, vulnerable honesty of the blizzard night had irrevocably altered the landscape between them, transforming fear into understanding, suspicion into a nascent trust. Eleanor's initial "please don't come closer" had been a shield, a reflex born of profound pain. Now holding his hand, feeling the quiet strength and warmth emanating from him, she recognized that her words had pushed away not a threat, but a kindred spirit, a man who sought solace as desperately as she did. The silence that settled around them was no longer awkward or tense, but rich with shared vulnerabilities, with unspoken confessions, with the fragile promise of a future less solitary. The library, once a place of quiet routine and guarded interactions, had become a sanctuary for two wounded souls. Outside, the city, vibrant and ceaseless, seemed to fade, its clamor unable to penetrate the quiet intimacy of this moment. The following weeks unfolded with a tender, almost hesitant grace. Their interactions, once confined to brief, functional exchanges, expanded, weaving threads of quiet companionship into the fabric of their daily lives. They would often find themselves lingering after the library closed, under the pretense of tidying up or reorganizing a particularly chaotic shelf. These were precious moments, stolen from the relentless demands of their lives, filled with soft-spoken conversations that peeled back layers of their pasts, revealing the intricate tapestry of their experiences. Eleanor learned more about Arthur's life before the fall, his passion for classical Greek and Roman literature, his animated lectures that captivated students, his dream of writing his own definitive work on ancient rhetoric. She discovered he was not just a self-taught craftsman, but a gifted woodcarver, his small apartment filled with intricate sculptures of birds, animals, and mythical creatures, each one imbued with a quiet artistry that belied his rough hands. He showed her photographs of his workshops, the delicate tools, the raw blocks of wood transformed into works of quiet beauty. She saw the profound joy he found in creation, a forgotten echo of the intellectual satisfaction he had once derived from teaching. He, in turn, learned about the quieter contours of Eleanor's life. She spoke of her love for old books, not just as a librarian, but as a reader, a seeker of stories that transported her beyond the confines of her daily struggles. She shared anecdotes about Lily, her bright spirit, her fantastical drawings, her boundless imagination. Arthur listened intently, his eyes softening as Eleanor recounted Lily's latest adventures, a flicker of longing for his own lost son evident in his gaze, but tempered now with an appreciative warmth. He learned of Eleanor's struggles with David, the insidious manipulation, the financial devastation, the profound loneliness of navigating single motherhood in the wake of betrayal. He saw the resilience in her, the fierce protectiveness that had once seemed like a barrier, now revealed as the most profound expression of her love for Lily. The hand-carved rabbit became a cherished possession, a silent talisman that Eleanor kept on her desk, a small warm presence amidst the sterile efficiency of her workspace. When Lily first saw it, her eyes lit up with delight. "Mama, it's just like the rabbit in your favorite book," she exclaimed, holding it carefully in her small hands. "Did Mr. Arthur make it?" Eleanor smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached her eyes. "He did, sweetie. Isn't it beautiful?" Lily nodded, stroking the smooth wood. "He's not mean, Mama. He tells good stories." That simple observation from Lily was a profound validation for Eleanor. Her daughter, with the unfiltered clarity of childhood, had seen past the rough exterior, past the initial fear, to the kind, gentle soul beneath. It reinforced Eleanor's burgeoning belief that she had indeed misjudged him, and that the path to healing lay in embracing this unexpected connection, not shying away from it. One evening, as they were locking up, a rare, shared moment of quiet descended upon them. Arthur, pushing his cleaning cart, stopped beside Eleanor, who was securing the main entrance. "Eleanor," he began, his voice hesitant, as if stepping onto new, uncertain ground. I have something I want to show you. It's a collection of my carvings, at my apartment. If you and Lily would be interested." Eleanor's heart fluttered. This was a significant step, an invitation into his private world, a place she knew he guarded fiercely. Her old fears, the echoes of David's treachery, tried to resurface, whispering warnings of vulnerability, of potential pain. But she looked at Arthur, at the hopeful, almost shy expression on his face, and saw only sincerity, a desperate longing for acceptance. The trust they had painstakingly built, brick by emotional brick, was stronger than the ghosts of her past. "We'd love that, Arthur," she replied, her voice soft, a warmth spreading through her chest. "Lily would be thrilled. She loves your stories." A genuine smile, rare and beautiful, touched Arthur's lips, transforming his usually melancholy face. It was a smile that spoke of relief, of a quiet joy long denied. The following Saturday, a crisp spring morning, Eleanor and Lily walked hand in hand towards Arthur's apartment in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood on the north side. The city was alive with the promise of spring, daffodils pushing through the thawed earth, birds chirping in the trees. Lily chattered excitedly, recounting all the imaginary creatures she hoped to see carved in wood. Eleanor felt a nervous anticipation, a mixture of hope and residual caution. This was new, uncharted territory. Arthur's apartment was small, meticulously kept, and surprisingly warm. Every surface, every shelf was adorned with his intricate wood carvings. Birds with outstretched wings seemed poised for flight, stoic bears gazed with knowing eyes, and fantastical beasts, reminiscent of Lily's own drawings, stood frozen in dynamic poses. The air smelled of freshly cut wood and old books, a comforting blend that spoke of quiet passion and dedicated artistry. Lily gasped, her eyes wide with wonder, as she stepped into the room. "Mama, it's like a magical forest." She ran from carving to carving, her small fingers tracing the smooth contours, her imagination alight. Arthur watched her, a soft, almost imperceptible smile on his face, a joy that resonated deep within Eleanor. He showed them his workshop, a small corner of his living room, neatly organized with tools of every size and shape. He explained the different types of wood, the painstaking process of shaping, sanding, and polishing. He spoke with an unburdened passion Eleanor had never witnessed before, his voice resonating with the quiet authority of a true artist. As Lily was absorbed in a corner, mesmerized by a carving of a soaring eagle, Arthur turned to Eleanor, his gaze earnest. "Eleanor," he began, his voice a little shaky, I know this is a lot, after everything, and I understand if you still have doubts, but I want you to know, what I said that night in the storm, it was true. I've never wanted anything but peace and connection, and when I saw you, I saw a chance for that, for the first time in a very long time." Eleanor met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a new clarity. The ghosts of David, the phantom pains of betrayal, had finally begun to recede into the background. She had spent so long building walls, so long fearing vulnerability, that she had nearly missed the profound, quiet beauty of a genuine, healing connection. She thought of her words, "Please don't come closer," a desperate plea born of a need to protect, but now understood as a barrier that had, for too long, kept her isolated. "Arthur," she said, her voice trembling slightly but firm with conviction, "I was wrong. That night I was so afraid, so caught in my own past. I saw a threat and I reacted, but you showed me something else, something real." She paused, taking a deep breath. "You showed me that sometimes the greatest love begins not with grand gestures, but with the courage to see beyond appearances, to recognize the lonely heart beneath the protective shell, and to finally invite it in." She reached out, her hand finding his, her fingers intertwining with his calloused ones. "I trust you, Arthur, and I want to see where this connection leads." A profound relief washed over Arthur's face, his eyes welling up with unshed tears. He squeezed her hand, a silent promise, a profound gratitude. The weight he had carried for so long, the burden of misunderstanding and injustice, seemed to lift, if only for a moment. Lily, oblivious to the emotional intensity of the moment, suddenly bounded over, holding a small wooden figurine of a fantastical creature, half rabbit, half dragon. "Mr. Arthur," she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling, "this one looks like one of my drawings. Did you know?" Arthur knelt, his gaze gentle. "Perhaps," he said, a soft smile on his face, "perhaps we have similar imaginations, Lily." Eleanor watched them, a warmth spreading through her heart, a feeling she hadn't realized she was capable of experiencing again. It wasn't a sudden explosion of romance, but a slow, careful building of trust, of companionship, of a shared journey towards healing. It was the quiet power of empathy, the profound beauty of second chances, blooming in the most unexpected corners of a bustling American city, between a single mom and a janitor who simply wanted to be seen. Their story was only just beginning, a testament to the transformative power of understanding, a quiet invitation to a future less solitary, less afraid. The carved rabbit, a symbol of their shared vulnerability and burgeoning trust, lay silently on the table, witnessing the blossoming of a connection that had, against all odds, dared to defy the past.